There are moments in history that pass like ordinary pages on a calendar, and then there are moments that seem to carry a strange weight, as though eternity itself has leaned a little closer to time. Most people look at a date and see nothing more than another sunrise and another sunset. Heaven, however, has never measured life by calendars alone. It has always measured it by appointments. What if the days before you are not merely days to be endured, but invitations to be answered? What if July 1st, July 2nd, and July 3rd are not random squares on a calendar, but moments that demand your attention? We often imagine that God's greatest works arrive with thunder, earthquakes, or voices from the clouds. Yet more often he comes quietly, standing at the doorway of ordinary life, waiting to see whether we will notice his knock or continue rushing past it. It is one of the curious habits of mankind that we spend years asking God for change while paying little attention to the very moments in which he intends to bring it. We long for extraordinary destinies but neglect ordinary obedience. We pray for open doors while walking carelessly past the ones already standing open before us. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that God remains silent, but that we become too distracted to hear him. We are surrounded by noise, yet starving for meaning. We chase tomorrow while overlooking the sacred opportunities hidden within today. So before these 3 days arrive and disappear into memory like countless others, I invite you to consider a possibility that may alter the way you see time itself. Suppose these are not merely dates. Suppose they are divine appointments. Suppose heaven has already written purpose into them, and the only question that remains is whether you will recognize what God has marked before the world persuades you to treat them as ordinary. There is a curious habit in the human mind that causes us to believe history is made only by great events. We imagine that the world changes because kingdoms rise and fall, because armies march, because inventions appear, or because famous names are written into books. Yet when we read the pattern of God's dealings with mankind, we discover something remarkably different. God often begins his greatest works by marking not places, nor people, but moments. Before a person steps into a calling, before a miracle is witnessed, before a prayer is answered, there is often a day that has already been appointed in the mind of God. This thought is both comforting and unsettling. It is comforting because it assures us that our lives are not wandering through an accidental universe. The hours do not tumble forward without purpose. The sun does not rise upon meaningless mornings. Every day exists because God has permitted it to exist, and every breath we draw belongs first to him before it belongs to us. Yet it is unsettling because it suggests that many moments carry a significance we fail entirely to notice. We are inclined to treat every sunrise alike, while heaven may regard one particular morning as unlike any other. Our mistake is not merely that we fail to believe in miracles. It is that we expect miracles to announce themselves beforehand. We imagine that if God intended to do something extraordinary, he would surely surround it with unmistakable signs. We think the skies would grow brighter, or the earth would tremble beneath our feet, or some undeniable certainty would remove every possibility of doubt. Instead, God frequently works beneath the appearance of ordinary things. An ordinary conversation becomes the turning point of a lifetime. An ordinary decision becomes the beginning of an entirely new future. An ordinary day becomes the dividing line between what was and what shall be. The world measures time by clocks and calendars, but God has never been confined by either. A date on the calendar is merely ink upon paper until God fills it with purpose. We often ask whether today is important, forgetting that importance is not discovered by our opinions, but by God's intention. The value of a moment depends not upon how busy it appears, but upon what God has chosen to accomplish within it. There is something deeply humbling in realizing that long before we awaken on any particular morning, God has already seen every choice we shall make, every opportunity we shall encounter, every temptation that shall confront us, and every grace he stands ready to provide. We arrive in the day as strangers, yet God has never been a stranger to it. He has walked through every hour before we have taken our first step. Nothing surprises him, because nothing occurs outside his eternal knowledge. This should alter the manner in which we approach our lives. We are inclined to ask whether a day will be successful according to our plans. God asks whether we shall be faithful according to his purposes. There is a vast difference between these two questions. One concerns comfort, the other concerns character. One seeks achievement, the other seeks obedience. It is possible to complete every task upon our list while missing entirely the one appointment heaven had intended for us. The scriptures continually remind us that God appoints times as carefully as he appoints people. Seasons are not merely changes in weather, but expressions of divine wisdom. There are moments for planting and moments for harvest, moments for silence and moments for speaking, moments for waiting and moments for acting. The tragedy is not that God fails to prepare these moments. The tragedy is that we become so occupied with our own schedules that we scarcely notice His. Perhaps this explains why so many lives seem filled with restless disappointment. We pray for God's direction while refusing to believe that He has already gone before us. We seek extraordinary guidance while overlooking the ordinary faithfulness that prepares us to receive it. We ask heaven to reveal its plans, yet we hurry through the very hours in which those plans quietly unfold. God rarely wastes a day, though we often waste countless ones, because we imagine significance belongs only to the dramatic rather than to the faithfully obedient. It is one of the oldest strategies of evil that it seldom begins by persuading a man to reject God outright. Such an approach would fail too often. Instead, it succeeds by convincing him that what is truly important can always be attended to later. The enemy has little need to destroy a person's faith if he can merely distract it. A distracted believer may still pray occasionally, still attend worship, still speak the language of faith, yet quietly overlook the very moments in which God intends to work. This is why distraction is not merely an inconvenience of modern life. It is often a spiritual danger disguised as ordinary busyness. There is a remarkable difference between being occupied and being attentive. A man may fill every hour of his day with activity and still remain blind to the purposes of heaven. Indeed, activity itself can become a veil over the eyes. We have come to admire those who are constantly busy, mistaking movement for progress and noise for significance. Yet God's greatest invitations have often been given in moments when a heart was willing to pause, to listen, and to recognize that eternity was speaking through the ordinary circumstances of life. The enemy understands something that many people overlook. He knows he cannot alter God's promises, but he can attempt to prevent God's people from recognizing when those promises are unfolding before them. If he cannot close the door God has opened, he will fill the hallway with distractions until the traveler forgets there was ever a door at all. It is a subtle strategy because it requires no dramatic rebellion. It asks only that we become slightly too busy, slightly too entertained, slightly too anxious, or slightly too preoccupied to notice what heaven is doing. How curious it is that the greatest opportunities are often missed, not because they were hidden, but because the eyes meant to see them were looking elsewhere. A man may search the horizon for a miracle while overlooking the quiet act of obedience waiting directly before him. He may expect God's voice to thunder from the heavens while ignoring the gentle conviction already resting upon his conscience. The extraordinary frequently arrives clothed in the garments of the ordinary, and those who insist upon spectacle often miss the sacred. Modern life has multiplied distractions beyond anything previous generations could have imagined. Every hour competes for attention. Every device demands another glance. Every notification insists upon immediate importance. Yet importance and urgency are not the same thing. Much that appears urgent today will be forgotten tomorrow, while the truly important often speaks with a quiet voice that refuses to force itself upon anyone. God does not generally compete with the noise we willingly invite into our lives. He calls, He waits, and He allows us the dignity of choosing whether we shall listen. This should cause us to examine not merely what occupies our hands, but what occupies our minds. Distraction is not always visible. A person may sit in perfect silence, while inwardly consumed by fear, resentment, ambition, or endless speculation. One may appear physically present while spiritually absent. The enemy delights in such conditions, because an anxious heart finds it difficult to recognize divine appointments. Fear narrows the vision until every possibility appears threatening, and every opportunity seems uncertain. There is another form of distraction even more dangerous because it wears the appearance of virtue. It is possible to become so occupied with religious activity that one neglects the presence of God Himself. One may spend endless hours discussing faith without actually listening to God. One may become fascinated by arguments, predictions, controversies, and endless debates, while overlooking the simple obedience that heaven has always required. Religion itself can become a distraction if it replaces communion with God, rather than leading us toward it. The pattern has repeated itself throughout history. Whenever God prepared to accomplish something significant, there were always those who failed to recognize the moment because their attention had settled upon lesser concerns. They were not necessarily evil people. Many were respectable, intelligent, and sincere. Their tragedy lay not in deliberate rejection, but in misplaced attention. They expected God to work according to their assumptions, and when he chose a different path, they failed to recognize him standing before them. The enemy understands that timing matters. A delayed response may become a missed opportunity. A neglected conviction may gradually lose its urgency. A door left unopened eventually becomes a memory instead of an entrance. This is why distraction is so effective. It whispers that there will always be another chance, another convenient season, another better moment to pray, to forgive, to obey, or to trust. Yet no one has been promised unlimited tomorrows. We possess only the present moment, and it is always within the present that God asks for our response. It is therefore not enough merely to believe that God has prepared meaningful days. One must also possess the spiritual attentiveness to recognize them when they arrive. Such attentiveness is cultivated by humility, nourished by prayer, strengthened through obedience, and protected by a willingness to silence the countless voices that compete for the heart. The enemy fears not merely believers who possess knowledge, but believers who remain watchful, whose hearts are awake, whose minds are fixed upon God rather than endlessly scattered among the passing concerns of the world. For such people become difficult to mislead, because they have learned that the greatest battles are often won or lost, long before any outward event becomes visible. There is an assumption deeply rooted in the modern mind that blessings arrive independently of preparation. We admire sudden success, unexpected opportunity, and dramatic transformation, often forgetting that God has rarely worked in this manner. While his power is certainly capable of accomplishing the impossible in an instant, his wisdom frequently chooses to prepare the heart long before he reveals the promise. The miracle may appear sudden to those observing from the outside, but it is often the culmination of a hidden process known only to God and the soul he has been shaping. Preparation is one of the least celebrated virtues because it lacks the excitement of achievement. It is quiet, patient, and often unnoticed. It asks a person to remain faithful before there is visible evidence that faithfulness will be rewarded. This is precisely why preparation reveals character. Anyone can rejoice when the harvest arrives, but only those who trust the goodness of God continue planting while the fields still appear empty. There is something profoundly revealing about the way God works. Before he entrusts greater responsibility, he often teaches smaller acts of obedience. Before he opens wider doors, he asks whether we have been faithful with the opportunities already before us. We are inclined to believe that greatness begins with extraordinary assignments, yet heaven often begins with ordinary faithfulness. A small decision made in obedience today may become the foundation upon which an entirely different future is built. Our difficulty lies in confusing waiting with preparation. We suppose that waiting means doing nothing until circumstances improve. God understands waiting very differently. His waiting is active rather than passive. It is the season during which the roots grow beneath the surface before the branches become visible above it. The tree appears unchanged to those who merely glance at it, yet beneath the ground an unseen work is taking place, without which no lasting growth could ever occur. The human heart naturally desires immediate answers. We ask God to remove every obstacle, reveal every detail, and settle every uncertainty before we are willing to move forward. Yet certainty has never been the foundation of faith. If every outcome were already visible, trust would become unnecessary. Faith does not consist in seeing the entire road, but in taking the next step, because we have confidence in the one who knows where the road leads. Preparation, therefore, requires a willingness to obey before understanding everything. It calls us to discipline our thoughts before circumstances change. It asks us to cultivate gratitude before the blessing becomes visible. It invites us to practice integrity when no one appears to be watching. Such habits may seem insignificant, yet they quietly shape the soul into one capable of carrying responsibilities that would otherwise become unbearable. There is another reason preparation matters. A blessing received before the character to sustain it has been formed often becomes a burden instead of a gift. Success without humility breeds pride. Influence without wisdom invites destruction. Opportunity without discipline quickly disappears. God is not merely interested in giving his children what they desire. He is concerned that they become the kind of people capable of receiving his gifts without being ruined by them. This explains why some prayers appear delayed. The delay is not necessarily evidence of God's absence, but may instead reveal his patience. He sees not only the desire within our hearts, but also the condition of those hearts. He understands that granting a request before its proper season may satisfy an immediate longing while damaging a greater purpose. We often ask God to hurry while He asks us to mature. Preparation also changes the manner in which we recognize divine opportunities. Two people may stand before the same open door, yet only one possesses the readiness to walk through it. The difference is not always talent, intelligence, or circumstance. More often it is the quiet work accomplished long before the opportunity appeared. Preparation sharpens perception. It trains the heart to recognize God's leading where others perceive only coincidence. There is something remarkable about those who consistently seem ready when important moments arrive. Their readiness is seldom accidental. They have cultivated habits of prayer while others neglected it. They have guarded their thoughts while others surrendered them to distraction. They have chosen obedience in small matters while others waited for larger assignments. When the appointed moment finally arrives, observers speak of luck or perfect timing, failing to recognize the years of unseen faithfulness that made such readiness possible. The soul prepared by God does not panic when circumstances become uncertain because its confidence rests elsewhere. It has learned that peace is not produced by favorable conditions, but by trust in the character of God. It has discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that obedience matters more than fear. Such preparation cannot be purchased in a single day, nor borrowed from another person. It is formed gradually through countless choices that seem ordinary at the time, but prove decisive when greater tests arise. This is why preparation should never be mistaken for delay without purpose. Every prayer offered with sincerity, every act of quiet obedience, every moment spent seeking God's wisdom, rather than merely demanding His blessings, contributes to a work far deeper than outward success. Heaven is shaping not only circumstances but character, not only opportunities but the soul that will one day stand within those opportunities. The person who understands this no longer asks only whether God is preparing blessings, but whether God is preparing them to receive what He has already determined to give in His perfect time, and according to His perfect wisdom. There is a peculiar comfort in believing that good intentions are sufficient. We imagine that if our hearts are sincere, if our desires are noble, or if our prayers are earnest enough, then nothing more can reasonably be asked of us. Yet one of the most persistent lessons woven throughout the life of faith is that belief, if it is genuine, inevitably seeks expression through action. Faith is not merely an opinion one holds about God. It is a manner of walking through the world because one believes God to be true. This distinction is often overlooked because thought is easier than obedience. We can admire truth without submitting to it. We can speak eloquently about courage while remaining comfortably where we are. We can praise faithfulness while postponing the very act of faith that heaven requires of us. There is an immense difference between appreciating a path and choosing to walk upon it. The first costs almost nothing. The second demands something of the traveler. God has never treated human beings as passive spectators in the unfolding of His purposes. He created men and women not as machines to be moved without their consent, but as creatures capable of responding freely to His call. This freedom is among His greatest gifts, yet it also places upon us a profound responsibility. Divine invitations require human responses. God may open the door, but He does not compel anyone to cross its threshold. He may illuminate the road, but He does not force reluctant feet to take the next step. It is precisely here that many lives become suspended between promise and fulfillment. The promise is not absent, nor is God's willingness lacking. Rather, the response remains incomplete. We continue asking for certainty while withholding obedience. We wait for every doubt to disappear before acting, forgetting that certainty is often granted only after the first step has already been taken. The bridge does not appear because we have crossed it. We cross because we trust that the bridge has been faithfully built. Faith therefore contains an element of risk, though not the reckless risk of gambling upon chance. It is the reasonable confidence placed in the character of God. A child stepping into the arms of a loving father appears to take a risk only because the observer forgets who the father is. In reality, the child's confidence rests not upon blind optimism, but upon a relationship already proven trustworthy. The Christian life is filled with similar moments. We move forward not because every outcome is visible, but because we have learned something about the one who calls us onward. There is another misunderstanding that quietly weakens faith. We often suppose that action must always be grand in order to matter. We dream of dramatic sacrifices, remarkable achievements, or extraordinary displays of courage, while neglecting the smaller acts of obedience that prepare the soul for greater responsibilities. Yet the kingdom of God frequently advances through unnoticed faithfulness. A word spoken in kindness, a temptation quietly resisted, forgiveness extended when resentment feels easier, a prayer offered when no immediate answer appears. These actions may seem insignificant to the world, yet heaven measures greatness by a different standard. The smallest act performed in obedience is of greater value than the grandest intention left unrealized. A seed hidden beneath the soil possesses more promise than 1,000 discussions about gardens. The man who takes one faithful step has advanced farther than the man who has merely admired the destination from afar. Action gives substance to conviction. It transforms belief from an abstract idea into a living reality. The enemy understands this principle well. He does not always attempt to persuade believers that God is unworthy of trust. More often he whispers that obedience can be postponed. Tomorrow, he says, will be more convenient. There will be another opportunity, another season, another moment when courage will come more naturally. Yet obedience delayed has a curious tendency to become obedience abandoned. Habits are formed not only by what we repeatedly do, but also by what we repeatedly postpone. God's invitations often possess a certain immediacy, not because he is impatient, but because the present moment is the only place where obedience can actually occur. We cannot obey yesterday, for it has already passed. We cannot obey tomorrow, for it has not yet arrived. Faith always lives in the present. It hears today, trusts today, forgives today, prays today, and acts today. Every meaningful response to God occurs within the ordinary moments that many people overlook while waiting for extraordinary occasions. Action also reveals what we truly believe. It is possible to profess confidence while secretly governed by fear. It is possible to speak about surrender while clinging tightly to control. Words possess great importance, yet actions uncover the hidden loyalties of the heart. If we genuinely believe that God is wise, we shall follow his wisdom. If we truly believe that he is faithful, we shall entrust ourselves to his guidance, even when the road bends beyond our sight. Conduct is often the visible language of convictions too deep for speech. This is why faith should never be mistaken for mere emotional certainty. Emotions rise and fall with circumstances. One day confidence feels effortless, the next it appears strangely distant. If faith depended entirely upon feeling, it would become as unstable as the weather. Instead, faith chooses obedience even when emotion hesitates. It rests not upon changing moods but upon the unchanging character of God. Such faith continues walking when enthusiasm fades, continues praying when answers seem delayed, continues loving when affection is not immediately returned, because its foundation lies deeper than passing experience. When God places an opportunity before us, the decisive question is seldom whether we understand every consequence. More often it is whether we trust him enough to respond. The open door has little value to the person unwilling to step through it. The invitation remains incomplete until it is accepted. Every divine appointment carries within it a quiet appeal for action, calling the believer beyond admiration into obedience, beyond expectation into participation, beyond hope alone, into the faithful courage of taking the next step that God has already placed before them. There is a tendency in every generation to measure significance by duration. We imagine that whatever changes a life must necessarily require many years, while whatever lasts only a few days can scarcely deserve our attention. We trust slow movements more readily than sudden ones, believing that history advances only by gradual steps. Yet the strange testimony of both experience and faith is that entire destinies have often turned upon moments so brief that they appeared almost insignificant while they were happening. Time is not measured merely by its length, but by the weight of purpose it carries. A single conversation has altered the direction of countless lives. A single decision has divided one future from another. A single act of courage has preserved hope where despair seemed certain. We readily acknowledge these truths when looking backward, yet we rarely recognize them while standing within the moment itself. It is much easier to identify a turning point after it has become history than while it is quietly unfolding before our eyes. This is one of the peculiar mysteries of God's dealings with mankind. He often compresses profound significance into surprisingly small portions of time. We expect transformation to announce itself through long processes and unmistakable signs, while heaven sometimes chooses a single season, a brief encounter, or a handful of days through which an entirely new chapter begins. The importance of such moments is not found in their duration, but in the divine purpose they contain. The world encourages us to believe that every day resembles every other. Monday follows Sunday, Tuesday follows Monday, and the calendar continues its steady march without interruption. Yet God has never regarded time as a uniform procession of identical hours. Certain moments become appointments. Certain seasons become opportunities. Certain days become thresholds between what has been and what is yet to come. The difference lies not in the movement of the earth around the sun, but in the intention of the one who governs both time and eternity. There is something deeply humbling in recognizing that a life may quietly change, while the outward appearance of the world remains almost exactly the same. The sun rises as it always has. Birds continue their songs. Streets remain familiar. Yet within the soul a decision is made, a prayer is answered, a burden is surrendered, or a calling is embraced, and nothing is ever quite the same again. Those observing from a distance may notice little difference, but heaven knows that history has quietly shifted. Human beings often underestimate these moments because we are fascinated by spectacle. We imagine that transformation must always be accompanied by visible excitement. We expect dramatic announcements, overwhelming emotions, or extraordinary experiences. God, however, frequently accomplishes his deepest work beneath the surface. Just as the roots of a tree expand long before its branches reveal new growth, the soul may undergo profound change before any outward evidence becomes visible. 3 days, viewed merely as units of time, appear almost insignificant. They pass quickly. Before one fully settles into the rhythm of them, they are already becoming memory. Yet brevity has never prevented God from accomplishing greatness. A short season governed by obedience may bear fruit for decades. A few moments of genuine surrender may heal years of wandering. A brief encounter with divine truth may accomplish what endless striving could never achieve. It is therefore a serious mistake to judge a season solely by its length. We often ask how long something will last, when we should instead ask what purpose it serves. A candle burns for only a little while, yet it may provide exactly the light needed to guide a traveler through darkness. Likewise, a brief season appointed by God may illuminate an entire future. Its value is measured not by the number of hours it contains, but by the eternal consequences flowing from it. This understanding also reshapes our view of ordinary choices. We frequently postpone obedience because we imagine another opportunity will surely arise. Yet every choice quietly forms the person who will make the next choice. Character develops through repeated decisions, and occasionally there comes a moment when years of preparation converge upon a single response. What appears sudden is often the visible expression of many hidden acts of faithfulness. The enemy understands the significance of decisive moments. He therefore seeks to persuade us that today is unimportant. He whispers that one neglected prayer cannot matter greatly, that one compromise is harmless, that one opportunity missed will easily be replaced. Such reasoning appears sensible until enough neglected moments accumulate to shape an entirely different life. Great losses rarely begin with great rebellions. They begin with the quiet assumption that this particular day carries no unusual importance. The opposite is equally true. Great victories often begin with small acts of faith that appear almost invisible at the time. A heart choosing forgiveness instead of bitterness, humility instead of pride, trust instead of fear, obedience instead of delay. These decisions may seem modest when viewed individually, yet together they alter the entire direction of a person's life. God delights in building lasting transformations from seemingly ordinary beginnings, because such work displays His wisdom rather than human strength. When we recognize that a brief season may contain extraordinary purpose, we begin approaching time with greater reverence. We cease treating days as possessions to be spent however we please, and begin receiving them as gifts entrusted to our care. Each morning becomes less an accident and more an invitation. Each hour becomes less a burden to endure and more an opportunity to respond faithfully. The soul grows watchful, not because it lives in anxious expectation of constant miracles, but because it understands that God has often chosen the smallest windows of time to accomplish the largest movements of grace, forever reminding us that eternity is never limited by the brevity of earthly days. There is a subtle danger that accompanies every opportunity, and it is not always the danger of making the wrong decision. Often it is the danger of making no decision at all. We tend to imagine that remaining undecided is the safest course, as though refusing to choose somehow protects us from consequence. Yet life does not permit such neutrality. Time continues its steady movement whether we respond or not, and every unclaimed opportunity eventually becomes part of the past. To ignore a divine invitation is not merely to postpone a response, it is often to allow a moment of eternal significance to slip quietly beyond our reach. God has given mankind a remarkable gift in the freedom to choose. He does not compel obedience, nor does he overwhelm the will with irresistible force. Love itself requires freedom, and therefore every genuine relationship with God contains an element of response. He calls, he invites, he reveals, he waits. The dignity he grants us is astonishing, for the Creator of the universe addresses his creatures not as unwilling prisoners, but as those capable of answering his voice. Yet this dignity also carries responsibility, for every invitation asks for a reply. We often think of God's call as though it were addressed only to prophets, missionaries, or extraordinary individuals whose lives seem far removed from our own. In truth, his invitations frequently arrive in the ordinary circumstances of daily life. He calls a weary heart to trust instead of fear. He calls an offended spirit to forgive instead of holding resentment. He calls an anxious mind to rest in his promises rather than in its own calculations. He calls a hesitant believer to step forward in obedience when every natural instinct urges retreat. These moments may appear ordinary to human eyes, yet they are often the very places where eternity touches time. There is something profoundly revealing about the nature of opportunity. It never remains still. We imagine it waiting patiently until we are finally prepared to acknowledge it, but opportunity possesses a season of its own. A door that stands open today may not remain open forever. This is not because God delights in withdrawing his goodness, but because life itself moves according to rhythms established by his wisdom. Seeds must be planted in their proper season. Harvest belongs to its appointed time. Delayed obedience may eventually become impossible obedience, because the moment designed for action has quietly passed. The human heart is strangely skilled at inventing reasons for hesitation. We tell ourselves that we need greater certainty, deeper understanding, more favorable circumstances, or stronger confidence before responding to God. We assume that faith will become easier tomorrow than it is today. Yet tomorrow possesses no magical power to transform reluctance into courage. The habits we cultivate today become the character with which we face tomorrow. A heart that continually postpones obedience gradually becomes accustomed to postponement until delay itself feels natural. This is one of the enemy's most effective deceptions. He rarely insists that we reject God completely. Instead, he whispers the comforting word, later. Later you will pray more faithfully. Later you will forgive. Later you will surrender that hidden burden. Later you will answer God's call. Later you will begin living with the seriousness that eternity deserves. Yet later has become the graveyard of countless good intentions. Many souls have intended to obey while quietly allowing their opportunities to disappear one by one until intention remained without action. There is another illusion that deserves careful examination. We often believe that missing one opportunity matters very little because another will surely appear. While God's mercy is abundant beyond measure, his invitations are not always identical. Every season carries its own purpose. The opportunity of one moment cannot simply be exchanged for another, just as spring cannot replace autumn nor sunrise substitute for sunset. God continually offers grace, yet the particular work he intended to accomplish within a given season belongs uniquely to that season. This realization should awaken not fear but attentiveness. The Christian life is not meant to be lived in anxious uncertainty, constantly wondering whether every minor decision conceals some hidden catastrophe. Rather, it is to be lived with open eyes and willing hearts, recognizing that each day presents fresh occasions to respond to God's presence. The question is seldom whether God is speaking. More often, it is whether we have become quiet enough to hear him amid the countless competing voices that demand our attention. When certain days stand before us, they should never be approached carelessly. Whether they prove outwardly dramatic or inwardly transformative, they deserve to be met with prayer, expectation, humility, and readiness. We cannot control what God chooses to do, but we can prepare the posture of our hearts. We can refuse to let distraction govern our minds. We can resist the temptation to treat meaningful moments as ordinary. We can remain spiritually awake, while others drift through life half-conscious of heaven's activity. There is a profound difference between merely existing through time and walking with purpose through time. One person sees only another date upon the calendar, another routine to complete, another collection of familiar hours. Another person sees the possibility that God has already gone before them, arranging encounters, opening unseen doors, strengthening hidden weaknesses, and preparing blessings that require only a willing response. Both experience the same sunrise, yet they inhabit entirely different worlds because one lives by accident while the other lives by expectation. When a person begins to understand that God may have marked particular moments with extraordinary purpose, life itself acquires a new seriousness. Prayer becomes more than habit, it becomes preparation. Obedience becomes more than duty, it becomes participation in the work of God. Time becomes more than something to spend, it becomes something entrusted to our care. Every invitation from heaven quietly asks for an answer, every opportunity gently waits for a response. Every appointed season calls for a heart willing to say yes before the moment passes into memory, and the next chapter begins under the watchful providence of God.